Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Drag Illustrated's The Racing Business with me, Jason Dukes. I'm super excited about today's episode because we have a person who I think is just going to be a super interesting conversation. Our guest this week is Karen Bailey-Chapman. She is a senior vice president of public and government affairs at SEMA. So most people are probably thinking pretty unconventional guest for the show, but the fact is, honestly, two things. One, the people who are fighting for us on the government probably have way more impact than I will ever have on the sport. Probably all of us put together, just because of the level and gravitude. Did I just make that up? Gravitude. We're gonna go with that. Gravitude of just the ginormity, probably another made up word, of all the things that they're working on. So super excited to have the guests, and then also for two reasons. One, obviously for the education. So far in most of the episodes that we've talked about during the Put Up Your Duke segment, what are some of the biggest threats to the industry? And people have said regulation, the government, environmentalists, different things like that. Some of those things we have a super, really good education on. Some of the things are, sort of these mysterious things that we don't really know, or don't really know what the government is doing, what the regulation is doing, and what the people are doing who are fighting for us. Second reason why I thought it would be awesome to have Karen on is for the inspiration and motivation for people who are looking to figure out what is their way in the motorsports industry. Like for me, I've had a whole motorsports career working in management and now in business coaching and consulting, and still having a huge impact in the motorsports world. So Karen could also tell you a little bit about her journey in working in government affairs, and then eventually landing here in motorsports, and how you can do the same if that's your path. So let's bring on our guest, Karen Bailey-Chapman, Senior Vice President of Public and Government Affairs at SEMA. Karen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome. How was that for an introduction? Did I get everything in there?
That's awesome. That's fantastic.
Right. Great. And thank you so much for being on the show. The reason why I got connected to you is I saw that the panel that you guys did at SEMA that I wasn't able to get to, that I really wanted to. So that's how this. So I did my introduction. How about yourself? Can you give us an introduction of, we can start out by, who's Karen Bailey-Chapman, but then also, what is the Senior Vice President of Public and Government Affairs at SEMA?
Well, it's a title with a lot of words, that's for sure. It's a big title.
No made up words, like
no made up words,
or whatever.
I love made up words. I love made up words because that's how it's what people remember, right? And so then you just create a word, and so why not, right? But yeah, for me, I joined SEMA a little over a year ago. I actually celebrated my 1-year anniversary right before the SEMA show, so it was my second SEMA show, and I made a profession in government and public affairs, as my title suggests, and have spent my the past 20 plus years as an advocate, within political advocacy organizations, and most of my time within corporate and business related issues. So variety of different issues and whatnot. But when I came to SEMA, when the opportunity presented itself to me with SEMA, it was a sort of the dream job that many people in Washington sort of only hope to have. And that is where you can take your professional piece, which is government affairs, and matching it up within your passions and the things that you love to do in your free time, which my husband and I are Jeep owners. We have 3 Jeeps. We like off-roading. So I'm not a racer yet. Although it's not because I don't have a desire to go fast. I love things that are fast. We do jet skis, anything that goes fast, and I have an open space to do it. That's usually something I love to do, including a variety of different sports like skiing and so forth. So I like speed. I just don't have enough time in the calendar to do it. But we are folks that go off-roading, and and I grew up in an automotive town. I grew up in a car town. I grew up in a manufacturing family. So for me, joining SEMA was really something that kind of brought everything home for me and representing exactly who it is that I wanted to represent. And that was in the manufacturing space, in a passion industry for myself, and then also an industry that represents largely small businesses. Because I think small businesses are getting caught in the crossfire of government these days, and oftentimes are, by the time they realize what's happening, it's sometimes too late because they're busy running their businesses and raising their families and being part of their communities. And so this was just a really cool opportunity to really, like I said, meet that passion with my profession.
Gotcha. So tell us a little bit about the actual title itself and the job. Like what does a day look like? What are some of the things you guys are working on?
Sure. So I lead an 8-person team with SEMA. We have most of our folks are based in DC. We have one person based in California. But the government part of my title is probably pretty simple, right? Pretty easy to understand. This is anything that deals with legislation, regulation, policy, and so forth. So anything that comes in contact with our industry, whether it's the racetrack itself, the cars that race on the track, the parts that are made to race on the track, all of the different environmental issues that you mentioned, everything from even things like Prop 65 in California to off-road access to federal lands and whatnot. So there's just a ton of issues that we deal with.
Just for Prop 65, can you tell us what that is? Just
Sure. So, so anybody that's traveled to California, there's always a sign somewhere, and it's actually becoming just sort of ubiquitous everywhere. Where if something is known or is believed to cause harm to humans, so may have a cancerous impact. So if you go to the gas station, there's a Prop 60. If there's a warning saying this product is known to have cancer-causing ingredients, and I'm paraphrasing the words, that's Prop 65. So that all came out of California. And so you actually see it. I got a rental car the last time I was at our headquarters, and right on the window it says, I had Prop 65 warning. And so they really apply to a lot of different products, and it's something that's going more and more into the automotive industry, not just in gasoline, but even in the products themselves. So if there's an ingredient in the upholstery in your vehicle that may trigger a Prop 65 because some agency somewhere has decided this is a potentially dangerous product. And so that's what Prop 65 is. And so then the public side of my public and government affairs title is really, how do we talk about this with the public? How do we educate our members? How do we educate the general population? How do we educate lawmakers? How do we frame that conversation? And how do we tell that story? So that's the public of the public and government affairs part of my title. So like I said, we're an 8-person team. Working at all levels of government, local, state, and federal, and just dealing with the day-to-day, whether we're dealing with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, NHTSA, which is the safety agency in the U.S., Congress, and like I said, state legislators or even local governments. So all up and down the chain. So we're a small team, but we're mighty.
Right. How much of or if there's a percentage, and I'm sure it probably fluctuates, how much of it is writing legislation on the front hand side versus like reacting to things that have already been done or in the works?
Yeah, that's actually something that I've really shifted since taking over the office last year, is really taking a more proactive approach to legislation. And I'm an athlete by nature as well, so the best offense is a good defense. Or excuse me, the best defense is a good offense. I completely screwed that up. So now I'm making up new cliches. Because I think, again, looking back to who we are as an industry, especially like whether you're a racer or somewhere in the racing industry or in the manufacturing sector of the automotive aftermarket, we're really focused on just doing what we do every day, right? We kind of keep to ourselves, do our thing. We love what we do. We have our communities in which we sort of exist in. So we often kind of get hit, if you will, upside the head when something happens. And so we've really taken a more proactive approach in terms of trying to create sort of, create our own destiny, or at least help shape our own destiny. So I'd say, today, we're probably about 50-50, being proactive about legislation versus reactive. And again, and we're doing that on a couple of areas, especially within the internal combustion engine ban, because, and we can get into this a little bit more, but with the potential bans on internal combustion engine potential bans on internal combustion engines, we're starting to take that issue straight to the American consumer, because a lot of consumers don't even know that this is coming down the pike with regards to the automotive industry. So I'd say about today, like, it'd probably be roughly 50-50. So it does feel pretty good when you're on offense.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, we'll get to the issues, and we'll get there. But let's first start out with Karen Bailey-Chapman, and the purpose of this segment of the show is for anyone out there looking to either get into government affairs or to sort of path their way in the motorsports industry. So let's just start out with you. Like, tell us about you and your growing up and how you found yourself into this job.
Sure. So, again, I grew up as a kid in a manufacturing town, in a car town. General Motors had a huge presence. Most of my friends' families, our parents, worked for General Motors. Most of my dad's family, a number of them, retired from General Motors. So I grew up in the automotive space. I didn't really think of it as anything other than that's just the way life. That's the way life is. And so, I grew up, went to school. I grew up in Canada. And so I came to the US to go to school and continued, finished out my schooling here, had the opportunity to come to Washington for an internship during my college years. And I loved it. And I've been involved in politics all of my life. My dad, as I mentioned earlier, I came from a manufacturing family. We had a small manufacturing business, but my parents were very heavily involved in the community. My dad ran for and sat on local city council. So I actually started door knocking for his campaigns when I was 4 years old. And for some reason, I loved it. Most candidates hate door knocking. If you've ever worked on a candidate campaign, I loved it. And so when I came to Washington and realized that I had the ability to make politics a profession and policy a profession, I fell in love, and here I am 20 something years later. So it's just very cool. I had did my undergraduate work in political science and leadership studies, but also did a lot of work in chemistry. I actually started as a chemistry major, but I didn't like sitting in a lab. It was kind of boring, and this was before smartphones and Wi-Fi. So I think maybe if I'd been born 10 years later, it might have been a different story. But I like the ability to translate complex issues and bringing it so people can understand. So then I did my graduate work at Penn State. I went into the workforce, but decided I still wanted to learn more and have some more more higher educational sort of strength, if you will. And so I actually did my master's in economics at Penn State University while I was located for a job up in Pennsylvania. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, but lots of education, but also a lot of fun in between.
Gotcha. And what are some of the industries that you worked into in the process of getting to automotive?
Sure. So right before joining SEMA, I was with the American Beverage Association, which is the non-alcoholic beverage association. So your big brands like Coke and Pepsi and Dr. Pepper and all of their bottlers, a pretty significant part of American manufacturing also, and a lot of challenging issues. Before that, I spent almost a decade with a casino company. So a lot of fun. I got to run around the country quite a bit, worked in 17 different states. And again, trying to tell the story of not only the company, but also the industry, creating new opportunities, new career paths, within a growing industry at the time, which was, especially the regional gaming markets. So spent almost a decade there. And then prior to that, I was in Washington before and worked in an agency and with political advocacy organizations. So I've always been I ended up in the thick of it. I don't know how a kid from Canada ended up right in the middle of it, but I did. And it's just a lot of fun. And actually my husband, I met on a campaign that I was working in West Virginia. So that's how I'm a West Virginian now. I'm here by marriage.
Gotcha. Well, and some of these questions you can answer as much or as little as you want to, but what are some of the things that you learned in the beverage industry that you learned in the gaming industry, and how do they mesh with some of the things going on in automotive right now?
Sure. So I think there's a couple of different things. Number one, at the end of the day, there's always an economic story to tell, whatever industry you're in. It's about the jobs, it's about the wages and benefits that that companies pay. It's about the opportunity. It's about the upward mobility opportunity. It's about careers in manufacturing. And so I feel like that is always a basis for a lot of issues that we deal with, because when you bring it down to actual jobs, and especially local jobs, and what the true impact is to the US economy, I think that's a baseline. And so when people say, like, how did you work in all these different industries? Like, well, I sort of look at it from that economic perspective and that numbers perspective. I think also too, with those two industries in particular, I think there's a lot of people, and I think this is the case also in automotive, is that people have a lot of assumptions of what you are and what you aren't. So that's again that public storytelling part of it. Whereas, with regards to the beverage association and the beverage companies, oh, you just sell sugary beverages. Well, actually, no. The industry sells everything from the sparkling water you drink to the iced teas and coffees you drink to even the milk that's on the shelf. These are industries that are much bigger and broader than what we sort of traditionally associate with them. Also, that your syrup, your can of Coke doesn't come from Atlanta. It actually comes from a bottling company just down the road, probably from you, probably within 20 or 50 miles of where you live. And so those are local jobs and local manufacturings and local small businesses. So I think that's, those are sort of the common threads. The same thing with the casino company that I worked for. We traditionally were in areas where industry had probably left. So you just sort of had a workforce that didn't really have much to do. You saw that throughout the Rust Belt in states like Ohio, here in West Virginia, so on and so forth. And so you just sort of look at it from a perspective of, again, opportunity, upward mobility, and things that people think like, oh, casino people just go throw money around and you just like collect the dice and you do this and you do that. And the fact is that there's actually true careers that come in that, in that case, you don't even need a college degree. And so I think these are some of the same things that sort of trend within the automotive industry, is that, again, you don't need a 4-year degree to be successful in the automotive industry. Racers are not just sort of these guys that just like to go fast, right? These are people that are really highly technically skilled. They're very attuned to the machines that they drive and the people that are around them that support them and create the products. And especially in the racing industry, so much of what we see in today's just traditional automobile that you buy from an OEM, a lot of that technology comes from racing. Right. Yeah. The seat belts, the roll bars, the safety systems, and all of that kind of stuff. So there's just a lot of commonalities and sort of breaking down some of the assumptions that people may have, or presumptions that people may have about the industry, and then actually sort of breaking it down to brass tacks.
Gotcha. So now at SEMA, pretty much in charge of all automotive, all racing, and that's a very wide spectrum. Right. And I mean, including me, I work with, sports car racing, which is, a little bit more whatever. And then drag racing, which, you can probably say is a little bit more old school grassroots. But, what's it like coming and working for something that is as vast as all of automotive and all of motorsports?
I think it's, it keeps me interested, it's having a variety of issues. So no day is the same. So as much as we deal with the differences within our industry and our respective industries, especially even within racing itself, as you talk about, but it's also about finding our commonalities and collecting that voice, because, you said in your own introduction, is that, your voice doesn't matter. My voice matters. And actually it's quite the opposite. When it comes to government relations, I'm just simply somebody who sits there and identifies the paths. I create the pathways. My team helps create the pathways. We help establish bridges, identify relationships that we need. But quite frankly, it's voices like yours and your audiences that are absolutely critical when it comes to the government part of the business. And so all of this sort of pulls into, you talk about this wide, vast industry of so many different interests, but we do have commonalities, and we have to sort of think about, while we have our differences, is really focus on our commonalities and the one voice that we have, because when you put that one voice together, it's huge. It's so strong. And so when you start to build that up, I think our industry, not like many others, really has a powerful voice, and we just need to start to use it.
Gotcha. So I'm trying to think of ways to say it and ways to have a conversation about this,
Mhm.
but drag racing is pretty traditional in that it's like like, and I shouldn't say even lumping all of drag racing together is a hard thing,
Mhm.
but most of the hardcore listeners of this show, particularly are internal combustion, you know, gasoline or fuel, and a lot of where the world is going is a threat to just the way that things currently are. Um, like I hate to put you in a situation where you may be the bearer of bad news or anything like that, but what is it that this segment of drag racing um, actually I don't even know if the word is needs to hear, misconceptions, different things like that, but I think we talked about it before the show a little bit. Like I love drag racing, like I love all racing. I just don't want to
Right.
see us get caught with our pants down and not
Mhm.
actually doing something with the threat.
Right. And I love drag racing too. It's actually the most compelling racing out there. I remember as a kid watching it on TV and just being like, that's really cool. And then when I actually first met our chairman, our current chairman of SEMA, he's a drag racer, Kyle Fickler. And I was like, I was starstruck. I was like, oh my God. And so I was like, teach me how to drag race. And so I don't kill myself on the first try. So, physics was never my strong point. I was more of a chemistry kind of person. So, but like I think, look, the threats are incredibly real, particularly, as you'd mentioned, internal combustion engine, gas powered engines and whatnot. But I think, there's going to be a balance of, where the racing space is versus the traditional, the OE space. But you're also seeing a shift happening in the policy debate that's happening today in the US over this whole forced electrification, about the mandates of electric vehicles and whatnot. And, as I think I mentioned this earlier, is when consumers start to find out that government's starting to dictate the type of technology we're supposed to use. Consumers are like, wait, hold on. Like, I'm cool with this EV thing. Like, EVs are, look, Teslas are a cool vehicle, right? But Tesla never sold the car as an environmental solution. Tesla sold the car as just some cool piece of technology. And I think when that debate shifted to say, oh, you must have this vehicle because of this policy reason or that policy reason, I think, consumers again are just sort of starting to hear what's actually really going on. And that's been part of, what we've been dealing with. But, again, with, even SEMA's position with regards to EVs and even PRIs, quite frankly, is the fact that it's an all of the above approach. We believe in technology. The innovator should innovate, and the market will drive sort of what solutions we are. If we want to seek lower or zero emissions, there's a variety of different ways that this can be done. And again, go back to the fact that, again, racing starts, a lot of stuff starts with racing. You see NASCAR using the bios, you see Porsche developing synthetic fuels, and they even got a carve out in the EU policies with their zero emissions goals. You see hydrogen, you see, obviously E85's been around, even though it's a gasoline blend, but how, the ethanol portion of it. And so the fact is that, even within the racing sector, whether you're in drag racing or other pieces of it, is that there are innovations happening with the fuels that we're using. And so where we, sort of when people, the advice I'd say is when you're talking about this issue to your neighbor who might be the one driving the electric vehicle and kind of looking down their nose at you, the reality is that it's not the engine that's the problem, it's what we're burning through it, right? That creates the ultimate emission. The internal combustion engine's been around for over 100 years. It's seen a lot of iterations. Again, we're seeing it in fuels that racing across the board is using, all different types of fuels. So don't throw out the engine. Let's figure out fuels. Because this year's SEMA show, we had a lot of hydrogen discussion. We actually had this whole alternative fuels section of the show, but also in the education portion of it. And this is really where the racing industry are the true innovators and the leaders in this space, because NASCAR can sit there and do its own fuel blends and do whatever necessary conversions they need within the engine technologies. Same with drag racing, same with any of these pieces. So let's let the innovators innovate and keep the engine. Let's change out the fuel and see what else we can do.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I know probably historically it happened over time and was a slow process, but it
Mhm.
seemed like, maybe the government overreach, if we use that term, happened pretty quickly. Like, and however much you can say about it, like, how do you think that happened as quickly as it did, and how do we get ahead of that for the next phase, or create the narrative for moving forward?
Sure. I think, one of the things is just be active whenever if anybody is, a member of our SEMA Action Network. And if you're not, please sign up. But, whenever you get a call to action to write to your congressman, write to your state lawmaker,
well, actually,
do it.
Go backwards. Tell us about the SEMA Action Network, and tell us about how to get involved.
So, well, the web address is SEMA SAN. So oh my gosh, SEMASAN.com. So SEMA SAN, or you can just go to SEMA.org/advocacy, and you also be able to get to it that way. But we're basically a group of, this is a culmination. We actually have almost 500,000 people within the SEMA Action Network countrywide. And these are anywhere from people that are in the business, but also enthusiasts. So whether you're just an amateur racer at your local track that likes to go out with his buddies and try to burn it up a little bit and compete, versus you just really like cars, or you actually are in the actual business of automotive and racing. SEMA SAN is really our call to action group of enthusiasts across the country. We're growing at a pretty rapid rate. But what we do there is we actually alert everybody whenever there's something going on legislatively or regulatorily. That is a word, and I said it right. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Good.
I think. I don't know. Well, we'll check it later.
I'm gonna put it on my list of words.
There you go. But we're sort of that call to action. We're that first alarm to say we need your voice, because going back to it, saying we're just the bridge makers. We're the ones that create the path, identify the path to do what the industry needs to do. But the reality is that it's your voices that are so incredibly important, because when your congressman gets that letter, you may think, it just goes in the trash. It actually doesn't. They'll tally it and say, oh wait, we got like 1,000 people in the district that are a little upset about this or supportive of something. So SEMA Action Network is really kind of, I would encourage people to sign up for that, so that you get notifications as to what's actually happening, and you can use your voice. And we do a lot of other stuff with the organization.
You know what? I'll interrupt you here, because this is the Drag Illustrated, the Racing Business podcast. You don't have to ask people. Tell people to sign up. Because here's one of the things, guys. Sign up, because here's what happens is that we go to the racetrack and everyone sits inside trailers, or we put stickers on the cars, and we all talk to each other about what's happening and what's potentially going to kill the sport, or what's going to do the things. But like, it doesn't help that there's 1,000 people at the racetrack that agree with each other, and then that's it. Like, we got to do something with that. Like, you got to let other people know in the places that matter, and this is an opportunity, sounds like, to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too is bringing your lawmakers to the track, or if you're a business associated with the track, invite your lawmakers to check out your operation. Invite your lawmakers to come down into the paddock with you and experience it firsthand, to meet all the people that are associated with it, to see the fans in the stands. The lawmaker, it's one thing to sit there and grumble about the guys that don't understand what we're doing, but if we don't invite them in, they're definitely not going to know what we're doing or really feel that. I mean, look, there's nothing like the sound of when the engines start up, right? There's just that when you hear that rumble, and again, no matter what part of the racing side you are, or in drag racing, when you see and hear and feel the cars take off, there's just no other feeling. And so people don't understand that or feel the excitement of the people that enjoy that, this sport. They don't know it until they're there. So invite lawmakers, whether that's your mayor, whether it's your city councilman, or if it's your senator, congressman, state lawmaker, doesn't matter. Have them out. Because the more they get to touch and feel and see who we are, what we are, and what we're doing, the fact that it's so family friendly, you see kids all the way up to grandpas and grandmas and everybody in between. That's a really critical part of who we are as a country, but also really critically important within just in the policy debate today. So invite your lawmakers and other community leaders.
Yeah. So beyond the racing, you also talked about a huge part of it are the industry industry, so the automotive companies, and then also the racing related companies. Most of the people that we have on the show either operate tracks. Actually, you know what? Before we get to that question, let's talk about tracks.
Yeah.
What are some of the issues that you guys see with just tracks? Like tracks closing is a huge thing that's actually happening in our industry. Some of which are financially or family based, but some of it is actually either regulation based or government based. Just what are some of the things that you guys are seeing and working on in that area?
Yeah. So, tracks have just sort of multiple threats, and it's everything. I kind of equate the track situation with farming. I married into a farming family here in West Virginia, and so, I think there's a lot of similarities between the two. I think you have issues like the next generation maybe not having an interest in keeping the track in the family or operating track. They want to go off and do something else or do something different. Just like my husband did. He grew up working on the farm, but he's a white collar guy now. He's like, I'm not doing that for the rest of my life. But other members of his family have chosen to continue farming. But then, the conversation that's happening even amongst us cousins is sort of what's the next generation? What does the next generation look like? So do we continue farming or do we do something else with regards to the land? So I think track owners, and especially family owned tracks, really have that same challenge. I'm not talking about, the big NASCAR tracks, the big, the IMSs of the world, but really these local family owned tracks. And I have one, as the crow flies, about 2 miles from my house right now. So anyway, so you have that sort of saying, what's the next generation? Is it sustainable? Do they even want it? Then of course there's development. Tracks were often built, sort of outside of town. They're not in the middle of town because we're noisy. That's part of the engine, right? But the reality is then as sprawl has happened, whether you're in a rural area like I am or, in a place like Denver, you just see obviously just the sprawl of housing. So now houses are kind of coming up on the track, even though the track's been there for 50 years or however long. There's some real challenges there with regards to neighbors and nuisance laws and whatnot. So again, that's another key part of, if that's the kind of things that are happening, if you're a track owner in that local kind of space, one of the things that we really encourage is having, again, lawmakers and the community come out and be part of the track. That's something I've seen with our local track is that they invite the community in. It's not just like, oh well, this is our racing season and it's only when these races are in that we're doing stuff. Involve the community, use the lands, find ways to use the lands for community purposes, even if they're not racing purposes, whether it's fairs or concerts or all of that kind of stuff. So I think you see a lot of that. And I'm going to use my local track, which is Summit Point here in Ripon, Summit Point, West Virginia. A lot of the tracks have also had to diversify their business models, saying, okay, so racing in itself cannot sustain this because there's just so many things. There's regulatory side or the legislative side of it, like the nuisance laws and what you deal with at the hyper local level. But then you also have, the land use and the environmental impacts and stuff that just, there's all variety of challenges that local tracks have. But in the case of like our local track here is that they've really diversified their portfolio. So not only do they do the traditional racing with the sanctioned bodies and whatnot, but they also do, they do a lot of law enforcement training. They have military contracts. They do, ride and drive experiences with car companies. So if you own a Porsche, then they have Porsche days. And so, and they partner with Porsche to bring in folks. They have, what else do they do? They do just a ton of things. And again, they also have community type things where they invite the community to be part of the track. And so they've really done a lot with diversifying what they, their business models. And that's just something, again, that's ultimately up to the track owners to decide as to whether or not to do that and how to do that. I've heard that with other tracks also. I'm completely spacing. There's track in Phoenix, and I'm totally spacing on the name, but they're another one that has done that with the diversifying their portfolio. And then there's, again, the decision too, some track owners saying, well, it's more valuable for me to sell the land to developers because of that sprawl. And, that's unfortunately the financial decision that they either feel they have to make, or maybe they choose to make. So we go back to the first conversation of saying, okay, if we're a family-owned track, what's the future? Does the next generation even want this? And so, everything that we're dealing with from a track's perspective, it's always sort of, there's a multiple set of issues. It's not typically just one.
Right. And on excuse me, on the government and legislation side, like who are the opposing sides, and what are their compelling arguments? Like, I hear about the nuisance laws, but is it like just the developers are super good at motivating people to go complain? Like, are people complaining, or is it just the developers doing a better job than the racing industry? Or like, how does that actually evolve?
I actually wouldn't say it was the developers, because the developers are just building the houses. They're not living there necessarily. Right. And so I think sometimes, so I don't know that it's necessarily the developers. But I think what happens is, somebody moves in, and again, I've seen it in my community, in where, people move into their new McMansions and they didn't know there's a racetrack 2 miles away, which, Saturday morning I walk outside and the engines are running already. And which to me, I'm like, that's cool. I like it. And you get used to it. Right. And it's when I first moved here, and, but they're like, oh, that's a nuisance. Well, we were here before you were, or they were here before you were. And so I think, again, in terms of the tracks, especially ones that have been around for a while, like my local track, and I think there's a lot of them. It's not like new tracks are being built every single day. But the thing is that work with your community. There are historical families that have been here. There are people that have been here and grew up with that track. They have great stories about that track. So again, that engagement with your community is really, really important, because it's not just about the racers running around the track, but it's also the people that support you. I don't get out to the track for events very often, because often I'm traveling and I'm not able to do it. But I'm sure as heck going to stand up for them if something starts to happen and, somebody tries to shut them down or tries to do something, but that's communication, right? So start to establish the relationships with people in the community, especially champions, people that are willing to champion. Create an email list, create a website, be inviting, inform people, and just have that relationship ready with your community, so that, when you have that unfortunate new neighbor, and with somebody with the name Karen, I can say this, when the Karens move in, you can be ready and just have that support. But support goes both ways, and so be active in your community and develop those relationships on the front end, and you're going to have a much stronger voice on the back end when something may happen.
Gotcha. So let's shift the conversation now to not the motorsports industry, but the manufacturing, the family businesses that produce products for automotive and racing. You talked about how it generally is for them, of just like this sort of being an afterthought. Like, they know the threat is there, but it's an afterthought because they're so hard at work in their business. What are some of the things that these guys should be looking out for? What are some of the things available for them, and just some advice?
Sure. So again, SEMA Action Network, sign up. That's the first sort of first line of information that we're able to share within the community. But look, the manufacturers in particular are very very regulated when it comes to emissions and emission systems on cars. So if you're on, if you have a car that's track use only, it's a strict race car, you don't have any issues. But what's I don't know if you remember, a number of years back, you faced a bit of a threat from the EPA, or not a bit of a threat. The industry did face a threat with the EPA, where we ended up on what we coin internally the EPA's naughty list, and it's the National Enforcement and Compliance Initiative list. So the industry about 4 years ago was placed on that list, which translates to the EPA is putting resources into enforcements against people that are doing, producing parts or using parts illegally for street use vehicles. So again, it's not the race car, but those that are using racing parts or ones that are not appropriate for on street vehicles. So number of industry players got hit pretty hard with fines. A lot of it was mostly in the diesel space, sort of the diesel deletes. It was on the heels of the big Volkswagen scandal. And so the aftermarket really got hit with it. And so from an emissions perspective is if you are producing parts that affect emissions, you need to be compliant with EPA's regulations. That's something actually SEMA helps with. We have the SEMA garage. And so we work with a lot of our members on ensuring the compliance through our SEMA certified, make sure that the product that they're making isn't going to defeat or delete or usurp emission systems within street use vehicles. So compliance is really, again, something really important for those that are looking to go to market for, the average car owner that wants to do something cool or different with their vehicle. So again, it's like, the best defense is a good offense. And so emissions is really the big key thing with manufacturers, and especially in the performance parts space and things that will affect the emission systems.
Gotcha. So the world is getting a lot smaller, and I see this more on the sports car side where, like things just aren't made for the US anymore, like it's made for the whole world. And honestly, including some language, like I hear some terms that evolve in Europe or other places in the world because of issues that they're having. And then that, even titles of organizations and titles of departments and stuff like that sort of trickle down. For the racer in the United States, or the small business in the United States, that, they have 10 to 15 minutes a day to focus on some sort of news or anything like that. What's some of the things just worldwide that they should be focusing on and just keeping in mind just to stay on top of what they're doing?
Right. I mean, I think probably at the top of the list here is the discussion over the internal combustion engine and this quest for zero emission vehicles. Sort of government written, a lot of this comes out of Europe, but California leads the charge. I'm going to sort of actually focus on California for a second, because a lot of this from an American policy standpoint comes out of California. And I think a lot of people don't realize is that 17 states actually attach themselves to California's emissions policies, to their emissions laws. So almost half of the American consumers are impacted by whatever California does when it comes to emissions laws. But some of the other things that are coming out from a global perspective, I mean, we always look at Europe, and they tend to also lead in some of these policy areas. Sort of if you want to know what's going to come next here, you just kind of look across the pond and see what they're doing. But you see things like these zero emission zones, where they're trying to make portions of cities or even entire towns or cities that are zero emissions. So you actually can't drive your vehicle through, or if you do, you get charged a toll, or some kind of, financial, I wouldn't say penalty, but it sort of functions like a toll, but for emissions and these zero emissions town concepts. The other thing is that, again, with the increased technology with vehicles today, we're driving computers. At the end of the day, we're so highly technical. So you see some stuff coming out of Europe that is doing things like tracking where you're driving, how much you're driving, how much mileage, how much fuel usage. And there's some policy concepts that they're testing and things like, oh, well, you're going to start charging people by what the car tells them you've driven. And so it, again, sort of that toll type system, but on the usage of your car. So, for anybody that's a George Orwell fan, 1984, this is sort of very sort of Orwellian, if you will. But these are some of the concepts that they're coming around. You've also seen and heard about some of the car companies who are shutting down people's vehicles if they miss a payment. They can electronically shut it down, or, there's just a lot of stuff. And I think a lot of that's going to be in the technical space. And again, even in the safety systems, again, not so much for racing, because racing is a controlled environment. Sanctioning bodies have all of their own rules, regulations to tracks as well, and safety systems. But, again, whether it's the lane assist and all the different accident avoidance type stuff, emergency braking, all of these systems are coming into play and right now they're, other than the only thing out of this is the rear backup cameras that we have now on our cars. Those are mandated by law. So every new vehicle now must have a rear camera. But now they're starting to expand that, or they're going to be expanding that over the coming years, probably over the next 7 to 10 years, is mandating some of these other things like the lane assist or the beep beep beeps and everything that you're doing. It's called ADAS, Advanced Driver. I can never get it right. It's the safety systems, but it's called ADAS. And so as that becomes more technically, much more prevalent in vehicles, and especially if the government starts to mandate it, it does have implications down the road, especially if you're looking to convert a street car into a race car, because it's like, how do you shut off those systems, right? Or what is it going to do to when you're trying to manipulate the vehicle for that on-track use? How does that translate? Because now as it's more technologically advanced, it makes it a lot more difficult for people that modify their vehicles and want to modify their vehicles to do so.
Gotcha. What's your message to, racing, especially drag racing, we're very much an interesting crowd, right? I notice a lot where like people tend to shut down argument rather than having the argument or having the conversation, right? So, something will come, like an environmentalist will bring up something and it's just like, no, that doesn't exist. So like, we're not going to have any of the conversation. But that ends up leading to the environmentalists having the conversation and then creating the legislation. So, I get we're probably not going to change anyone here, but just in your business of government affairs and public affairs, like the amount of actual argument, actual argument with the other side, like not just like saying your side in an echo chamber, but argument with the other side and conversation with the other side, and actually being a part of the conversation rather than just blowing the whole thing off and it doesn't exist, and then therefore being being a victim of the threat.
Yeah, look, I think we all see what's happening in American politics right now, and we're not exactly the poster child of good conversation and open conversation. And so I think for our community, especially the drag racing community, is don't be afraid to have those conversations, because conversations aren't bad things. We're all learners. We all want to learn. We're all students. And especially, again, in racing, we're always learning new things. When you're at the track, you're going to learn something new. And so that still also goes for things like policy and how we feel about issues and how we talk about issues. And so I think it's really important for us as a community to demonstrate some adulting, because, like I said, in American politics, adulting is not exactly prevalent these days. And so don't be afraid to listen, and don't be afraid to also share what you believe. But it goes back to inviting other people in, inviting people to experience what you're experiencing, to see the nuances of what we're doing, seeing the nuances of what is possible, and sort of helping find those commonalities and those bridges is just really important. So don't be afraid of the conversation. Shouting and yelling doesn't probably help, although sometimes it does feel really good. But I think being open to conversation, being open to listening is really critical. And I'll give an example. We have a lawmaker program at the SEMA show every year. And we invite lawmakers from around the country to come in. It's typically state lawmakers, as well as some federal. And we had a senator actually from California, who came for the first time last year. He was an EV only guy, just EV, battery, like that. He was just hook, line, and sinker. And he came to the show because we had, sort of some of these technologies there, and he wanted to learn more. So then fast forward another year. So he came again this year. He actually was a sponsor of a bill for us in California with regards to the aftermarket and conversions of vehicles and all that kind of stuff, which was great. But he came this year, and we had a much bigger technology section that included things like hydrogen and some of the biofuels, and had a lot of educational programs around all the alternative and emerging fuel systems. And so he's a guy that, again, was battery only, was on the battery bandwagon. Battery electric vehicles is the only answer to. He did actually an interview with NHRA at the show, and he talked about, he's like, look, I realize now that government's got to get out of the way and let the innovators innovate, and that there's so many other fuels like hydrogen and others that are part of the solution and can be part of the solution. And so he's like, I think as lawmakers, we need to educate ourselves and allow ourselves to be educated so that we make better and better policy decisions and the best ones that we can, and not just assume that we know the answers. And I thought that was incredibly powerful, because again, this is a conversation with somebody that probably in our industry people probably wouldn't have wanted to have, because he's more environmentally focused and so forth. But by engaging with him and his willingness to hear us and our willingness to hear him, was a great story, case study in terms of how an honest conversation, an ongoing conversation can really help people transform how they're thinking, because again, knowledge is power. And so as you're able to share that information, you really can make inroads. So I'd say don't give up. You're not going to solve a problem or a disagreement in a day. These conversations take time, but be deliberate and be persistent and be open and willing to share.
Gotcha. So this is super important conversation for all parts of the industry, the manufacturing, the family business, the tracks, the racers. We end every show with a couple questions, and they're 1 minute. Yeah. No, they're all good. It's time to put up your dukes. So okay. It's 13 questions or so, and 1 minute answers.
Oh gosh. Okay.
All right. Whew. So the thing is, for this, it could be either your personal answer, or for the industry, or for the title, or however you want to answer it. You can go on any tangent that you want, just limited to a minute in each answer.
Okay.
All right. First question is, what is either the strength of you, strength of the industry, strength of SEMA?
Strength of the industry is small business and manufacturing, and we are at the heart of America, and that is our strength. We are the people employing local people, creating skills and jobs that really aren't found anywhere else within the country. So SEMA is our small businesses and the people they employ.
How about the weakness?
The weakness, oh gosh, that's a hard one, because I think we're just awesome. I think the weakness, yeah. No, I think our weakness is that I think we maybe sometimes are a little shy. I think we're a little shy. We kind of do our thing. We don't know. We kind of have a, like, let us do our thing. And if we leave everybody else alone, they'll leave us alone. And that obviously is not how it's kind of happening these days. So I'd say our weakness is our shyness. And so I think we need to start to utilize our voice and start to push back on some of the challenges that we have that are facing us.
Biggest opportunity.
Biggest opportunity, gosh, there's so many. Or
a list of opportunities too.
Yeah. I think again, it goes to our biggest opportunity is our size. Not only are we a $337 billion industry in this country and employ 1.3 million people, our biggest opportunity is to start to flex those muscles. Our biggest opportunity is to bring more people into this industry, into this part of this industry, and demonstrate the fact that we're the ones training those in the technical skills. We're the ones training in the vocational skills. We're the ones keeping America moving and creating that next generation of automotive experts, but also the technologists, the chemists, the mechanics, and all of that kind of stuff. So our biggest opportunity is keep doing what we're doing, and actually let's do more. Let's put put the pedal to the metal.
Nice. Biggest threat.
Biggest threat is, I'd say, the government overreach. I mean, I'm gonna echo what I think you've said. Other guests have mentioned. Our biggest threat are people that don't fully understand, and they presume and assume what automotive is and isn't, who we are as an industry aren't. And the biggest threat is really the, if you will, sorry for such a harsh word, but the ignorance of those outside of our industry as to presuming or assuming who we are. And so as a result, then that ends up in bad policy that we have to defend against, bad actions against us. And so I'd say that.
Gotcha. Most underrated and overrated part of your job?
Oh Lord, the most overrated part. I think people think when you say you're a lobbyist, like, oh, you go to cocktail parties and fancy things, and it's like no. I mean, there are people that do that. I don't do that. That's not my thing. So yeah, people think that it's this glamorous job, and it's not. But it's a lot of fun. So I think the overrated part is that they think it's about the fancy cocktail parties, and it's not. I'd rather be in my Jeep out on trails than at a cocktail party. So underrated part of the job. I think, and especially in the racing industry, I think the underrated part is that it does take time to accomplish things and to move policy. We know Washington moves very, very slow. State governments move a little faster, so that's helpful. But I think the underrated part is that, as racers, we know there's a clear start line and a clear stop line, and government doesn't work quite that way. And it's we don't get to go as fast as we want. So I'd say that's the underrated part.
What's your advice to the future generation?
Gosh, future generation, I would say take advantage of all the knowledge around you. Take advantage. Don't let anybody tell you that if you go like that, automotive is dead. Don't go into automotive. I mean, that's the thing I hear the most from young people is that people say, well, don't go into that industry. It's dead, because everybody thinks it's about going to work for the OEs. And that's it. You just go to Detroit, or actually, quite frankly, the OEs are all over the country now with such an expansion of the industry. But don't let anybody, if this is the passion that you want to follow, so whether, that passion and that opportunity isn't dead. It's not something that was just preserved for people coming into the industry 50 years ago. It's very alive and well today in so many different ways. You look like a job like mine. I don't have to be an auto mechanic to be able to do what I want to do for this industry and within this industry. There's so many different pieces to the industry. So follow your passion and use the resources around you, which are the people, which is, I think, our greatest asset. And, follow the passion and don't be afraid, and don't let some teacher tell you that the automotive industry is dead, because it's not.
All right. Well, we're gonna go full screen on you for this next question. So JT, get ready for this. The last, and I think you've probably already answered this. And if it turns into just a 1 minute ad for the advocacy portion of SEMA, that would be totally great too. Last question, and we'll go full screen for you for the answer. So wait for the full screen. Is what do you need from, like, what do you as the senior vice president of public and government policy need from the racing business community here? And wait for it to go full screen, and we'll get your answer.
All right. The greatest thing I need from the racing industry is your voice. Please join us at SEMASAN.com. Sign up for alerts and use your voice whenever we give you your call to action with your lawmakers. Also, please mark your calendars. Members of SEMA are going to be invited to our Washington rally, May 8th and 9th of 2024. So just this next coming spring, we're going to make a big splash on Capitol Hill with bringing our voices to the Hill. So, if you're a SEMA member or PRI member, please mark your calendar for May 8th and 9th, our Washington rally in Washington, D.C. And you'll also get those updates if you're at SEMASAN.com.
Awesome. Well, there you have it, folks. Another great episode of Drag Illustrated's The Racing Business. Karen, we want to thank you so much for being on the show. I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing, and thank you for mobilizing us to help you do that work, because we definitely everyone sees the threats, and we know what to do with the threats. So we thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. And just remember, your voices are the most powerful thing you have, even bigger than your engines. So don't be afraid to use them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Right. Another great episode of Drag Illustrated's The Racing Business. Thank you so much for watching. Remember that the show is brought to you by Racers Club. You can go get the great merchandise at racers.club. I always want to say racers.club.com, but I'm showing my age. It's just racers.club. And then also check out everything Drag Illustrated. They help put this together, including executive producer of the show, JT Tundra Hudson. So love you guys. Thanks for being here, and let's make a difference.